A suicide bomber blew himself up Monday afternoon in a passenger minivan heading towards a Shiite-populated area of Beirut. The attack is the latest in a surge of suicide bombings that have stretched the capabilities of Lebanon's security agencies and the powerful Lebanese Shiite militant group Hezbollah. An article by Nicholas Blandford features in the Christian Science Monitor covering yesterday's story in southern Beirut, only a few days after a suicide bomber exploded his vehicle at a petrol station in Hermel in the Bekaa Valley, killing 4 people and wounding 23. The bombing was claimed by the Jabhat An-Nusra, an extremist Syrian rebel faction affiliated with Al-Qaeda. Blandford says Lebanese security agencies and powerful Hezbollah have struggled to staunch the surge of bomb attacks in Shiite areas, which have accelerated since mid-November when 2 suicide bombers targeted the Iranian embassy in Beirut and killed 23 people. The writer adds the Shiite community in general still supports Hezbollah and accepts the party's choice to fight in Syria against radical Sunni militants that it dubs takfiris. However, the bomb attacks in southern Beirut, of which there have been 5 since last July, are having a paralysing effect. Businesses are being hit as the number of people willing to venture into the area, take advantage of the cheaper prices of food and goods, falls. Residents are looking to sell their properties or rent elsewhere in Beirut. Christian Science Monitor reports that Hezbollah recently set up imposing barricades of concrete and steel with heavy metals crash barriers around the Rasul al-Azam hospital in southern Beirut, where many fighters wounded in Syria are being treated, making the facility a tempting target for Al-Qaeda-linked extremists. The piece concludes by saying what's especially discouraging to many Lebanese is that at least 2 of the 8 people who have blown themselves up were Lebanese Sunnis, unprecedented acts for a community that is traditionally moderate in Lebanon. The identities of 5 of the bombers remain unknown. A 3rd Lebanese from the northern city of Tripoli slipped across the border into Syria and blew himself up in Homs on January the 25th. Joining us today on the show is Nadim Shahadi, an Associate Fellow at Chatham House in London. Welcome to the show.
Marhaba. Hello.
Hello. Nicholas Blandford, correspondent of the Christian Science Monitor, says that the Shiite community in general still supports Hezbollah and accepts the party's choice to fight in Syria against radical Sunni militants that it dubs takfiris. However, the bomb attacks in southern Beirut, of which there have been 5 since July last year, are having a paralysing effect on the Hezbollah areas. Do you agree that the party is being paralysed? And what do you think Hezbollah could do to avoid such acts targeting their communities?
Well, of course, such attacks are paralysing because of the security arrangements that have to be made to prevent them. And in a way, such security arrangements we've seen have paralysed almost the whole world after 9/11. Travel became much more difficult, and airports and even getting into buildings and out of buildings and embassies. So there is a natural paralyzing effect to any security arrangements. The case of Hezbollah is a bit different because there's no difference in principle between Hezbollah as an organization, as a sort of fundamentalist, extremist Shiite organization, and the extremist Sunnis, but except that in Lebanon, the extremist Sunni organizations do not have the support of their communities. What we've seen in a place like Qaeda was that Sheikh Ahmed al-Asir did not get the backing of the community in his town. And he came in, he sort of emerged with about 300 followers and left with 300 followers. It's the same. Whereas Hezbollah has the backing of their community. They have an enabling environment, and I think that's the main difference.
And Mr. Shahadi, how would you compare? You just basically compared Hezbollah, calling it a fundamentalist extremist organization, except that it's Shia instead of Sunni. So are we comparing Hezbollah here to Al-Qaeda, and on what grounds?
Well, yes, in the sense that they are both religious extremist organizations, I mean, and that engage in violent attacks. So I think for vis-a-vis each other, they are more or less parallel in their existence.
But can we? Is it valid? Sorry, I just have to challenge your idea. Perhaps is it valid to say that they are comparable because Hezbollah has rebranded a long time ago from any sort of terrorist activity. So while the Sunni extremist groups we're seeing them in Lebanon and in Syria. They are directly associated with terrorism. Perhaps you could argue, of course, but Hezbollah.
Well, you see, the Sunni extremist groups do not have an enabling environment in the same way as Hezbollah has, and if they rebrand themselves, they may have more support. At the moment, in Lebanon specifically, the Sunni extremist groups are very marginal and do not have the support of their community because of the way the community is, and because of the brand they carry, which is not acceptable to their community. So a rebranding would make them possibly more acceptable, but it wouldn't change the fact that they're Sunni extremist groups.
Yes. Other parties in Lebanon, namely the March 14 coalition, oppose Hezbollah's policy of interference in Syria. For example, MP Sami Al-Jmayil said after the attacks on the Iranian embassy in November, what is going on is the natural result of Hezbollah's policy of interference in Syria. And he went on to say, quote, Nasrallah brought the Takfiris into Lebanon. Do you agree? And what advice could you give today to the political rivals in Lebanon to avoid getting into a catastrophic scenario?
Well, it is a fact that Lebanon is divided about what's happening in Syria. And the division is unbridgeable. I don't think that the Lebanese will ever agree on whether to support one side or the other exclusively. So we have to live with that division. And we have to live with that division while avoiding a confrontation at home. And there are such instruments as the national dialogue, the Mabda declaration, the government policy of disassociation, which Hezbollah belongs to. I mean, Hezbollah is part of a government that has a policy of disassociation. So I think these measures help in preventing the conflict from erupting internally in Lebanon, but these measures are not followed.
Mm-hmm. So do you think it's too late, Mr. Shahadi? Do you think these fundamentalists, and especially when it comes to suicide bombings in Lebanon, which is a little bit new on the scene, we've seen before cars that were exploded remotely, but now it's suicide bombings. Do you think it's gone beyond the internal conflict in the Lebanon and perhaps it's too late to control it? It's more like a jihadi takfiri fundamentalism that is leaking from Syria, from the rebel factions like An-Nusra?
I'm not sure. I think it's very difficult to say, and it's also very difficult to say how much of that is manipulated by security services or have state backing to destabilize the situation. I think the best way of putting it is that when you hear President Assad of Syria saying that if his regime is destabilized, then the whole region will blow up in flames, then if you interpret this as political analysis on his part, it would be very different than interpreting it as a threat. And I interpret it as a threat. I interpret it that he's saying that he would destabilize the region, and his role in Lebanon is known with takfiris before and with jihadis before in places like Nahr al-Barid and others, and in the Palestinian camps also, and his role in Iraq is well known, and his involvement in Turkey as well.
We must say, though, that President Assad's words, like you said, you see them in your own perception as a threat, as a threatening.
Yes.
But then maybe it's the geopolitical structure in the region, and especially with Lebanon being on the border of Syria, things do spread around. But then again, they weren't only the words of President Assad. They were the same words used by Lakhdar al-Ibrahimi, UN envoy to Syria, and of course, they were also the words of Ban Ki-moon. They were the words of Sergei Lavrov. Yes. So perhaps...
Yes, and there is no doubt that what's happening in Syria risks spreading into the region, and that's why I think there needs to be a resolution to the Syrian question as quickly as possible.
So you link the situation in Lebanon directly to the crisis in Syria and to Hezbollah's stance in Syria?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, I don't think there is any doubt that the division in Lebanon is linked to the position over Syria, and this has been the case since 2005, even before the revolution started in Syria.
We did have in Nahr al-Barid, like you mentioned a tiny bit earlier, fundamentalist Sunni extremism, and back then the Lebanese Army interfered in the camp.
That's right.
Now, at that point, there wasn't any reason for such acts against the army. Now, obviously, Hezbollah wasn't.
What do you mean there was no reason?
I meant, like, back then there wasn't such scenario as Hezbollah interfering in Syria and the Sunni.
No, but what happened in Nahr al-Barid was a very clear attempt to destabilize the country, using jihadis that came through Syria and with the help of Syrian apparatuses in the country, and this is and the Lebanese government has clearly outlined that. So that's why I'm saying it's very difficult to determine how much of that is a reaction and how much of that is a manipulation.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Shehadi, for joining us today and for your valuable contribution.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
That was Nadim Shehadi, Associate Fellow in the Middle East and North Africa program at Chatham House, also published in renowned journals and newspapers. For more updates, visit us on levant.tv. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.